This is a presentation from John Henderson, and he is a Metro District finance expert. And we asked him to do a analysis of the Triveni Square Metro District just so we could learn more. He's also a member of the Coloradans for Metro District Reform, and he'll tell you a little bit more about himself, but I think that's a good introduction. So take it away, John, and I'm going to mute myself, and then if you'll just mute everybody. Thank you.
Okay, let me, do you all see the presentation on the screen? Okay. Let me get to the mute button. Hold on. Sorry. Okay. I've unmuted everybody. And now getting back to my presentation. Stand by. Okay. Can everybody see the presentation? Okay, seeing nods. Very good. Well, hello, my name's John Henderson. I've met some of you for the last presentation, and great to see you all again, and look forward to talking about metro districts again. The information that I'm providing to you is based upon roughly 8 years of my research, advocacy, educating folks and helping folks identify issues related to metro districts and how to address those issues. In terms of my experience, I have a master's degree in public administration. I'm an attorney admitted to practice in Colorado, and I've represented developers and residents in land use issues. I've developed my own portion of land, and more relevant to what we're talking about today is I've developed an expertise in Colorado metro districts, beginning with an evaluation of my own metro district in Solterra, beginning in 2016. As a result of that, I've spent a lot of time sharing what I've learned, educating others, and helping them identify issues and address issues as they attempted to meet some of the challenges. I also worked with others to establish an organization, Coloradans for Metro District Reform. We've spent a lot of time doing those things, educating and identifying issues. We've also spent a lot of time the last 4 years talking to state legislators and testifying on and proposing legislation that would help address reforms. I've been recognized by several jurisdictions as an expert, published. The Denver Post and Gazette have both recognized me as an expert. So I guess those 8 years were an accumulation of stuff that I'll share with you and hope it's valuable. One thing I'll emphasize here in the beginning is I've obviously interacted with the industry, and some of those interactions have been pleasant, some have been unpleasant. One criticism that has been lodged against my work is that this is all opinion. And I suppose there are some opinions here and there, but what I do, contrary to what I've observed the industry does, is I'm actually showing you the documents. This isn't me talking. This is the developer talking, or the developer industry talking through their own documents and through their own history, certainly easily since 2000. So metro districts, what are they all about? You start with a developer and he purchases land. That developer then makes improvements to the land, and those improvements sorry. Okay, those improvements take the form of pipes in the ground, streets, sewage treatment plants, and swing sets and swimming pools, rec centers. Everything and anything that the developer does to change the land, the raw land, and add value to that raw land is what we call the infrastructure, and I refer to as pipes in the ground. The developer then sells that developed lot. You have the land, you have the pipes in the ground and swing sets and whatever else it may be, the land, the improvements, and those two items are sold to, in the case of residential development, the builder. And the builder will build a house on those lots. Typically, builders will buy anywhere from 5 to 20 lots in a development and put a house on that developed lot that has pipes sticking out of it. That home builder then sells it to you and me, the residents, which we buy. So when we pay for the house, we're paying for the building on top of the ground. We're also paying for the ground, and we're paying for the pipes in the ground and swing sets and rec centers and swimming pools. And that's the way developers get paid. They get paid for the money they've fronted, that they've put up to buy the land, and money they've fronted and put up to put the pipes in the ground and swing sets and swimming pools. And they get paid by the home builder. The home builder buys the improved lot, and then the home builder turns around and sells you and me the house, which includes the cost of the developed lot. So that's how developers make money. And that's the traditional way, I'll call it. That's the way developers made money building houses and developing commercial property in Colorado, roughly before 1981. And it's the way they do it in most other parts of the country. I lived in Virginia, bought homes and property in Virginia, Kansas, and Maine. And in those other jurisdictions, that's how it was done. I lived in one development in Virginia. We had 3 swimming pools, 2 rec centers, tennis courts, basketball courts, and all of that was paid for when we purchased the house and paid back the home builder for the money that he paid to the developer for the land and the pipes in the ground. All right, so we come to Colorado and metro districts, and that's a different animal. In Colorado, we've added to the option of paying through the cost of the home, metro district financing. And I guess one way to think of that is it's kind of a la carting the price of the home. Instead of paying for the land, infrastructure, and house when you buy the home, under metro district financing, at least theoretically, you're paying only for the house and the land, and you're paying separately, a la carte, for the cost of the infrastructure, the pipes in the ground, swimming pools, whatever. And that has been a prevalent, not exclusive, but prevalent way that developers have financed the cost of infrastructure, certainly in modern times, the last 20 years or so. And after they amended the statute in 1981, it was available. So the question is, why do they do this? What's the advantage? You will hear a lot from the industry that this is a way to keep housing affordable in Colorado. Well, you'll perhaps have a different opinion about that after considering some of this information. But that's one of the pitches that they have, that it's more affordable. You'll see there, I say the price of the developed lot, $30,000 to $40,000. The $30,000 to $40,000 is an industry figure that came from the Colorado Home Builders Association, from the Special District Association. Since I've been promoting that number the last 8 years, they say, well, it's actually a little bit higher, but whatever it is, it's their number, and that's how much it costs per lot. And you'll see, or I can share with you from my experiences the last 8 years, in virtually every case, that's what it turns out to be. And they say, well, the cost of housing in Colorado would be $30,000 to $40,000 more if you didn't use Metro District financing. Of course, that assumes that they haven't already paid themselves that money when they sold the developed lot. And the bottom line is, whoever owns what is developed, in the case of residential housing, the home, or in the case of the commercial property, they end up paying the taxes that pay the debt, bond debt, that pays for the infrastructure. In your case, I looked at some of the numbers, and I know the sands have been shifting and there are different aspects of the project. I'm not in the weeds on it, of course, but just for example, I looked at the residential projects, the workhouse housing, condominiums, and the apartments, and looked and saw, yes, it's roughly $3,000 for each one to do the infrastructure, and coincidentally, that fell within the range of $30,000 to $40,000 per lot or per unit. And again, what does that look like in terms of debt to the homeowners? In this case, the developer in charge of the Metro District filed with the state an exemption from audit, and as part of that, they had to report any authorized but outstanding unissued debt. In this case, count the zeros, it's $3 billion of unauthorized debt that they have, that's authorized debt that has not been issued yet. And that's kind of hanging over the heads of whoever moves into that Metro District, whether it's residents or commercial. They'll have that number hanging over their head as debt that they're potentially liable for. And here's what that looks like when the bonds are issued. In your case, under the service plan, financial plan, the financial plan that was attached to the service plan approved by the city, the developer proposed to issue 2 rounds of bonds. The first bond was supposed to be issued this month, December 2024. I don't recall the exact amount, but somewhere in the $50 million range, I believe. But at any rate, it's a matter of record. They haven't done that yet, but that was their plan, to issue the first round of bonds and this month. And then the second round of bonds, was going to be issued in 2034. And the total combination of those two is shown here, and as $95 million worth of bond, the interest, $42 million. And this would have been refinancing the first bond issued this month, if they had, plus additional money to the Metro District. So you can see we're talking about a lot of money, $3 billion of authority, like a credit card limit hanging over your head, and issuing $95 million in debt. And these numbers are real. I'm sharing this with you. This is a excerpt from an audit in another development that had a $70 million debt principal outstanding. But after all of the interest and that debt is now, or at least at the time of this audit in 2020, was $304 million, on a $70 million principal, and it's approaching $500 million now. So this is real money. Those limits mean something. They aren't just thrown around willy-nilly. And the residents in this particular district essentially are going to be paying on this metro district forever. They'll never pay it off because the interest kept compounding. So in a couple of examples, I'll show you 3 slides here. An analysis was done by the homeowners on, well, wait a minute, let's do the math and figure this out. Did we pay for the cost of the pipes in the ground, swing sets, pools, when we purchased our homes? And we did the research in our community, and we found that after paying for the cost of the land and the cost of the infrastructure that was otherwise covered by metro districts, after paying for those 2 items, when we purchased our homes, we paid the developer $75 million in profit on an investment of about $41 million. Not a bad return. In another jurisdiction, before the metro district financing kicked in, developers made 40% return. With the metro district financing, 96%. And in another jurisdiction, you see the difference was 80% return versus 1,000% return. And the point here is that the metro district financing is really, the bottom line, a tremendous way for developers to make a significant return on their investment. Keep in mind, industry-wide, nationally, the rate of return by developers is roughly 15 to 30%. And here they're making significantly higher percent return. And how does that translate for our homeowners? Here's an example of 2 properties that were down the street from each other, comparable appraised value, assessed value, and you see they're all paying the same taxes, except one's paying taxes for metro district, the other isn't. And the one where there is no metro district, the cost of the developed lot that was paid through the purchase of the home covered the cost of the pipes in the ground, and there was no metro district financing. So essentially doubling the amount of taxes. So keep in mind, metro districts, special districts are not in and of themselves bad things, right? Special districts include library districts, recreational districts, fire districts. But when it comes to metro districts being used by a developer to allegedly finance the cost of infrastructure, it's a whole different animal. In the first, and going back to the old days, when the miners were doing this, or the early landowners, group of people would get together, and that group of people would be the people paying the taxes, would get together and say, hey, let's put our resources together and build a dam, or build a sewage system, or build some roads. So they all get together, they pool in their money, and they decide to tax themselves in order to pay for these things. And that's a good idea. That works, right? Where it's a bad idea is that the people who are making those decisions about building something and paying for it are never going to actually pay for it. In this case, developers. The people who are going to pay for it at the end of the day are the residents, or the folks that purchase the property, commercial folks that come in to build it. And in the course of processing these metro districts, the developers, in order to control absolutely the flow of money and decisions about what is spent and what debt is issued, um, uh, have worked the process in order to minimize, if not eliminate, the opportunity of the people who are actually paying the money anything to say about it. So checks and balances, to be sure, and let there be no doubt about it, metro districts are a government. It's not an HOA, a contractual arrangement with all the notices and signatures associated with the contract. This is a government. It is a government that has the power of eminent domain. It has the power of taxation, issuing debt, police powers as well. So these governments are created under Title 32 through a city or a county, what I'll call a sponsoring city or county. And the process is initiated by the developer, who presents an application in the form of a proposed service plan. And that service plan becomes the charter. It's not a constitution because it wasn't voted on by the people. It's a charter, one government giving authority to another group to establish a government, not unlike the Virginia charters back in the 1600s. So in this case, you have your town, Dillon, approving a service plan for this Triveni, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Metro District to create a government. Where are the checks and balances? Well, unfortunately, there are only two places. The state legislature hasn't been very interested in setting meaningful checks and balances recently. The Attorney General is not interested. Local prosecutors are too busy. So the only check and balance, when you get right down to it, is the town, and then ultimately the voters, taxpayers, residents of the Metro District itself. Now, as with any new development, there ain't anybody there. Nobody's living there. Residential developments, you got the prairie dogs, rattlesnakes, occasional mountain lion, but no people. And so the only real check and balance is the town creating it. And good news is that Title 32, the state statutes that provide for creating metro districts, also give virtually a blank check to the cities and counties to impose any criteria, conditions, regulatory obligations that they want to in the service plan. That service plan is the charter. And in the handbook, if you've seen it, I prepared a couple of years ago, I list the statutes, and I also reference some of the things that cities and counties might want to do in order to put some checks and balances on the developer as they're running this government. As we all know, our local governments, as well as state and national, are based upon this notion of balance of power, checks and balances, and one power, one authority, kind of counter-checking the other. With metro districts, if the town doesn't exercise that role, there is no accountability. There is no public accountability. There is no check and balance. The developer is the government, is the only authority. And if no one's looking over their shoulder, no one's looking over their shoulder. There's no accountability. Looking at the service plan for this particular metro district, I just kind of put a point on it. In the introduction, the developer's attorney, writes in this paragraph, and I've seen it in hundreds of these service plans. It's all boilerplate stuff, but they bend over backwards to begin educating, grooming the city to believe that the city really doesn't have any power over the Metro District, which isn't true. Under Title 32, they have a tremendous amount of power when it's written, particularly when it's written into the service plan. But they take this opportunity to make the point that once you create this Metro District, you can't do anything to oversee or supervise what's going on because it's a separate government. And again, there are exceptions to this, but the greatest exception and the most powerful, of course, is to address it up front with provisions in the service plan that provide the reins that you need to establish financial accountability. So I mentioned that the voters, taxpayers have an opportunity to exercise these checks and balances. And we can talk about that a little bit more later. But until they get there, of course, they don't have that opportunity. And the problem is enhanced because even once they get there, the developer has taken measures through creating the Metro District to minimize or eliminate their right to participate. So we'll talk about Tabor elections, the obvious conflicts of interest, and how that right of the taxpayers and the residents to vote on increasing taxes and issuing debt are minimized or eliminated. So, Tabor election. We start out by talking about what elections are involved in a Metro District. The very first election that is required under Title 32 is basically the creation election. That is to say, whoever owns the property, and in virtually every case that we're talking about here, it's the developer, his family members, his employees, or his associates sit around a table. I envision them eating pizza one Friday night, and they say, okay, we're going to have a Metro District election. Anywhere I've seen as few as one person in that room to up to 12. In our case, it was 8. In your case, it was 7. Those folks sit around the table and they say, okay, we vote to create this Metro District. That's the only vote that they have to make in order to start a Metro District. But the most important vote to them is the second vote, the second election, and that is a Tabor election. That Tabor election we're familiar with. That's an election where the voters only certain times of the year can do it. Typically, it's around the November election with notice to all the residents that the city or the county wants to issue bond debt or they want to reserve the opportunity to spend excess taxes or they want to increase taxes, whatever it must be. Under Tabor constitutional provision, the voters vote on this ballot issue in a Tabor election. Well, what happens in Metro Districts is the developer has their own Tabor election. The 7 folks sitting around the table, none of which who are pay taxes, all of whom are either family members, employees, or associates of the developer. They sit around and they say, okay, we're going to vote on these ballot issues. And as we'll see here in a minute, one of the key things they vote on is to essentially eliminate the right of future residents to vote on any increases in taxes or issuing bonds for 20 years. And this helps address the question that I know you folks have been asking. Why is there 120 million debt number set in the service plan, and yet in the Tabor election and the authorized debt as filed with the state is $3 billion? Why the difference? And we'll hopefully help answer that in a minute. So here's the Tabor election. This is an example. This is one of the ballot issues in your Tabor election, Triveni Square. and basically does three things. First thing is they voted, the seven folks sitting around the table eating pizza, in my in my mind, voted to increase debt for a particular purpose. In this case, sanitation, sewer. They've got I think 10 of them in your case, including mosquito control, traffic lights, streets, in this case, sewers. $120 million, which is the number in the service plan, with a repayment cost of $984 million. So they're authorizing that debt principal with the repayment cost, which means the principal plus interest of up to $984 million. Then the second thing they do is they vote on a potential or interest rate cap of 18%. Thank you very much. And then the third thing they do, and this is the kicker, in that last portion, and I'm going to start halfway down on the second column, and shall the proceeds of any such debt and the revenue from such taxes and any other revenue used to pay such debt without regard be spent without regard to any spending or other limitation contained within Article 6, Section 20 of the Colorado Constitution. That's Tabor. And one line above, it says who's going to decide how much debt shall be issued. It's the District Board of Directors, which, for as long as the developer can do it, will be exclusively or majority of the developer, his employees, family members, or associates. So what they're voting for when they pass this ballot issue in the Tabor election, they're voting to give all of the power to the District Board of Directors to issue future debt. And when they do issue debt, it's going to be regarded as if it was issued by the voters, and the limits, otherwise limits in Tabor, do not apply. So why do they do this? And keep in mind the numbers. How do you get to $3 billion? And actually, if you do the math with this ballot issue, it's closer to $10 billion. Why do they do this? Why are they giving themselves basically a credit card limit of up to 10 or $3 billion, a debt authority of $3 billion? Well, it isn't because so much that they're planning to issue that much debt, although they could. And in that one district, as we saw, they started with 70,000. Now they're up to 500,000, 500 million. So the question is, why are they doing this, even though they probably won't spend this money, even though they're authorizing themselves that they could? It's because once they've issued this number, they've had a Tabor election, and it preempts the need to have any more Tabor elections because they've already voted to authorize themselves to spend $3 billion. So when I come along and I say, well, wait a minute, why did my taxes just go up? And they say, well, because we voted to issue bond debt in the amount of $50 million. And in order to pay for that bond debt, your mill rate went up, and so you're paying for that. And I said, well, wait a minute. I didn't vote for that. How did that happen? And under Tabor, you can't issue bond debt unless I vote for it, unless the residents vote for this. And they said, oh, back in 2006, there was a Tabor election, and the voters voted to authorize debt up to, in our case, $4.9 billion. So we've already had that election and you missed it. Of course, not only did we miss it, but the people who were the 8 people, or in your case, 7 people sitting around the table, had an absolute conflict of interest with me. And just to kind of highlight it, this is an excerpt from the bond prospectus that will be issued in this case, if they issue bonds. This is an excerpt from a bond in our case. And what the developer is saying to the bond investment community is, please buy these bonds. It's a great investment. And just to show you how enthusiastic the residents are and how excited they're going to be to pay back the principal and all that interest, you should know that the voters in this community authorized indebtedness of up to $4.9 billion. They can't wait to spend this money. And they're so excited to have you loan them this money and pay you back in a lot of interest, because the voters at the 2006 election voted to do this. Now, this is a bond prospectus going out to the bond investors. Obviously, I never saw this. It wasn't part of my closing documents, but they didn't hesitate to share it with the bond investors. And the most, I'll use the word insidious thing about this is, nowhere in this bond prospectus does the developer tell the potential bond investors that those voters who sat around and voted on this were all the developer's family members, associates, or employees who had an absolute conflict of interest with the folks who would actually be paying the bills. And here's what that conflict of interest looks like in your case. You've got Mr. Roberts, who, as I understand it, is the president of each of the boards for the Metro District, is on the development team with the developer, Mr. Porritt. Dave Young is another member of the board of directors. It's my understanding Mr. Aubrey is also on the board, and he's involved in the business and the financing business related to development. And then you have Mr. Locke, who managing partner of this holdings company that actually owns the property or has an interest in the property. So the folks on the board of directors have a conflict of interest. How do they get on the board? How do they become qualified electors, voters, when they don't own property, they don't have, they're not going to be paying taxes, they're not going to live there? Well, you may have heard reference to it in your case, but they have an options contract. They have a deal with the developer, and that deal gives them a alleged interest in the property sufficient to qualify themselves as an elector. Well, we got a copy of one of these contracts, and not in your case, but in another case. And here's what it looked like in that district. Basically, the developer's employee in these cases entered into a contract to purchase a portion of the property. And in this case, I think the total size of the property was about 1 square foot. So the deal was $600. They only have to pay 10% of that figure, and they don't have to pay until the closing. And in this case, the closing was scheduled about, I think it was about 4 years after the bond debt was issued. So, okay, I'll use the word, it's kind of a sham contract, right? It doesn't, it's designed to give them an interest without any real substantive ownership interest in the property, and it certainly doesn't eliminate the conflict of interest that they have. All right. So we talked a little bit about the service plan. We'll talk a little bit more about it too, but the conflicts of interest become even more important, not only after voting on this on these ballot issues, but in structuring the the governance of this district. As I mentioned, the developers will work to maintain control over the boards of directors as long as they can. And they do that right off the bat by entering into agreements with themselves. I describe them as agreements with themselves to do things and not really worth the paper they're printed on. I can't agree with myself that my neighbor has to pay for the cost of me building my deck. That's just not the way these things work. Well, here's how these things look. So the first agreement is a coordinated services and reimbursement agreement. And this basically lays out how the 4 districts in your case are going to work together. One district is going to be the coordinating district. They're going to decide how much money to raise in taxes. That district is going to decide how to spend that money. And the detail of budgeting is always interesting. They basically will do the budget. If the directors of the other districts have any complaints about it, they try to work it out. But if they don't, the coordinating district's going to do whatever they want to anyway. So when you look at the signatures for the districts, you've got District 1, which is what I'll call the coordinating district or the master district. That's the one that's going to do all the taxing and spending. And so District 1, Mr. Roberts, is entering into this agreement between himself as the president of District 1, with himself as the president of District 2, with himself as the president of District 3, with himself as the president of District 4. So again, Mr. Roberts is entering into an agreement with himself, obligating District 1 on the one hand and Districts 2, 3, and 4 on the other, with obviously different interests, which dissolve because it's the same person. And just to put a point on it, the attorneys representing both the coordinating district, which is going to be in charge, and the financing districts, which are going to be subservient to the coordinating district, are the same attorneys. And when I say subservient to, I mean that under this arrangement, the only power that the financing districts have is to pay all of their tax revenue to the coordinating district, period. In fact, here is the list of services that the coordinating district is going to provide, i.e. the powers that they have. And it's a very long list of basically they're doing everything. There is no list of the services to be provided by the finance districts, 2, 3, and 4, because their only job is to pay all their tax revenue to the master district. So that's one agreement. The second agreement is equally important. This is the agreement between the developer and District 1 to basically pay the developers debts for the cost of infrastructure. So District 1, which, as we saw earlier, is the master district, the coordinating district, is entering into an agreement with the developer to pay the developer's costs. And guess who signed this? Of course, Mr. Roberts signed on behalf of District 1, and Mr. Port signed on behalf of the developer. And keep in mind, we saw on that previous conflict of interest page that both are in business together with the developer organization. So in essence, you have the developer entering into an agreement with himself that District 1 will pay the debts of the developer. You have the same entity, the same individuals entering into an agreement with themselves that the tax-paying districts will pay all the debts of the coordinating district. I put this slide together. It shows the district boundaries, which are very important. The service plan has to do at least two things. One, establish what the purpose of the district is. And number two, what the territory, what is this government's territory going to be? Because under Title 32, anything that happens outside those boundaries cannot be charged. The taxpayers inside those boundaries aren't going to have to pay taxes on anything that happens outside the boundaries unless it is expressly provided for in the service plan. All right, so we're back to the service plan. And, I hear it all the time, the service plan provide guardrails for the developer. That's the checks and balances. Well, the developer's writing the thing, their attorneys are, and they're only going to put guardrails in for themselves that are going to benefit themselves, unless the city or the state in some minimal capacities require other limits. So in this particular service plan, I just selected a couple of highlights on the supposed guardrails. There is a debt limit of 120 million. What that says is the developer never has to get permission from the residents to spend up to 120 million. And they don't have to get permission from the city to spend 120 million because the city is already agreeing to it in this plan. So the developer basically has authority to issue debt up to 120 million. They can issue debt between 120 million and three or 10, however you do the math, $billion, between 120 and $3 billion without permission of the residents, but they'd still have to get permission from the city to spend anything between 120 million and 3 billion. Note that in the service plan, how they do that is pretty relaxed. It should be a material change, considered to be a material modification of the service plan, requiring a vote in public and a public hearing. But they've written into the service plan that they can do it just as a resolution. And I suggest to you that that's a shortcut that isn't enforceable under the statute. One of these other things the service plan does is they talk about modifications and do their best to limit the extent to which the city can interject themselves in the process. And they provide self-serving language that says this agreement or this service plan has sufficient flexibility that there isn't going to be the need for numerous amendments. Well, again, the statutes override this language, and a material modification is a material modification, and that may have already happened in your case. Let's see. District governance, again, self-serving language, which is inconsistent with the statute. It says that qualified electors will be on the board. We know how they're being qualified through those contracts, and that they will assume control of each board until users arrive, and the users are residents. And the users will assume control of the board as development of the service area progresses. Well, that's not what the statute says. As soon as somebody moves in, they have a right to vote, they have a right to serve on the board. There is this kind of mantra, this campaign that developers promote, that they should be in charge of all of this until they're done doing what they're going to do and ready to move on. And that's simply not the case. Under the statute, it's a government. And if I move in, I don't have to wait until they're done building or spending money or issuing tax debt. I have an opportunity to serve on that board and weigh in on that process as soon as I move in. But again, they're trying to build into these service plans language that conditions, grooms cities and counties to think otherwise. The multi-district structure, we looked at how they're doing that. Again, they put in the service plan, there's going to be the structure, this master-servant relationship. And it doesn't exist in Title 32. They just do it. Fees, this is important. There is a limit on the amount of money they can spend, $120 million. There's a limit on the, at least potential limit on the mill rate of 100 mills, which is the highest I've ever seen. But there's no limit on fees. And what I've seen in many districts is the districts get upside down. There isn't enough money coming in through the mill rates to cover all the costs, so they start issuing fees. And fees of $100 a month looks almost like another 35 mills. It's still money coming out of the person's pocket for paying for government services. Whether it's a fee or a tax, the impact is the same. The maximum mill levy you have in the service plan here, 50 mills, but it's 50 mills for debt and another 50 mills for operations and maintenance. In most cases, the two are combined, and there's a total limit of 50 here. The total limit is 100. And then you have this magic language, which is in all the service plans. It basically says when the assessed value, as determined basically by the developer, becomes such that the debt is equal to or less than 50% of the assessed value, there is no limit. Again, much of that to be determined by the developer. I'll note here just at the bottom, it is anticipated the developer will advance funds to pay for their operations and maintenance until the districts have enough revenue. Those developer advances have already started. They issued $50,000 in advances. The footnote there is those developer advances are basically loans with interest. As it says here, the district shall be authorized to reimburse the advance with interest. In our case, they laughed at us because we said we'd like to know what you spent the money on for the bonds that are already issued. And there's the laughter and response was, you owe so much in interest already, it doesn't matter how much or what we spend it on. In this case, there's a 40-year limit on the debt that can be imposed. As you read further down, you see that can be increased by the board once the board becomes resident controlled. What happens as a practical matter is the bond debt frequently has a balloon at the end. The residents are now in charge. They see all of a sudden we've got to pay $5 million we don't have, so they issue another bond in order to cover that. that additional bond could be another 40 years. Um, and there are other ways that gets extended as well. This privately placed debt, this was something that was authorized in the, I think it was a 2023 or 2022 session of the legislature. We vigorously opposed it because it created an opportunity for developers with a significant conflict of interest to pay themselves a lot of interest, as in the Castle Towers example I showed you earlier. And this was highly contested in the legislature, but at the end of the day, the industry prevailed. The cautionary note is whenever you see references to external financial advisor or a engineer or financial consultant who is qualifying expenses or qualifying, in this case, the interest rate that will be charged, you just have to remember, keep in mind that if they are not outright paid by the developer, they are part of the community where they obtain their their livelihood. And there have been some examples of folks, particularly the qualifying engineers, who have been caught, in one instance, making up numbers which were used to influence a city in order to increase the amount of authorized debt under the service plan. Okay. I have some examples of our legislative experience in trying to get reforms enacted in order to stop or minimize some of the abuses. I have a couple of tapes that are interesting, but I know I'm running over my time, so I'll save that to later if anyone has any questions. All right, let me open up the unmute folks. I'll ask everyone to unmute. Thank you.
So do we have any questions? I had one right off the bat, John. So we were wondering if developer advances can include the cost of the land and if the Metro District can repay those.
Short answer, no. Title 32 only talks about reimbursing the developer for the cost of the infrastructure services, the improvements, right?
Why would the cost of purchasing a land for a public park not be considered part of the infrastructure?
I think it's just definitional. I can, I'd have to get into the statute with you to provide the language, but it's just definitional. That's how they set it up. That's how they created it. It's now, there may be some language that I'm not familiar with, or there may be some case decisions that say that give you a different answer, but that's my understanding based upon the operation of the statute. But honestly, to really put a fine point on it, that's something that I'd want to look up and research. But I've never come across an instance where the land was ever included in the infrastructure costs.
Last week when we had a Q&A with you, I asked, what can we do to get ourselves out of the spot that we're in? And one of the things you mentioned was revising, or we have an opportunity because the development parameters have changed, that we could have a new service plan. We brought this up at the town meeting, just on an initial basis to introduce the idea of a new service plan from the Metro District. And the developer was sitting there and he's going, no, 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 like that. So we would need the sympathy of the staff and the town council to override the developer's opposition to changing the service plan. Does you refer to the town having its authority in the legal sense in Title 32? Is that the way you say it?
Yeah, title. Yeah.
Okay, so could the town use this title to force a revision or a new creation of a new service plan from the Metro District?
Yeah. So, again, I'd have to, I can't, I'm not giving you a formal legal opinion, but
Yeah.
But I'm raising options and things to talk to your attorney about. One is under Title 32, if there's any material modification to the service plan, it has to come before the city or county that originally created the district and approve the service plan. The service plan, again, is like a charter, and we're talking about limited government, right? We're used to giving powers to governments to do certain things, but only those things and only those powers. They don't have a blank check to do whatever they want to. For example, in Solterra, we had a metro district, but we couldn't unilaterally decide to build a rail line to Winter Park because it wasn't in the service plan. So if something in the service plan doesn't happen, or if things are happening that aren't in the service plan, or there are changes being made to what was authorized in the service plan, those all have to come before the city council in the way of a modification. And under Title 32, a modification follows exactly the same process as creating a new service plan to begin with. So has to have public hearings, have to have a decision by the city council or county commissioners and public. That, if that's happening, which it sounds like it might be, again, I'm not in the weeds on it, can't give you an official opinion on it, but it sounds like that might be happening. You have an opportunity to convene a hearing on a modification of the service plan that even though the applicant isn't making a formal application, they're acting or doing things or behaving in a way that is inconsistent with. And so there's an opportunity for you to bring them before the city council and have a hearing on whether the service plan should be modified. And in the course of doing that, I don't think it's a far stretch to then begin to address amendments to the service plan that would be consistent with any new modifications that are being proposed. So that's one avenue. Again, I see there may be others. Another is legislation was recently passed, and I shared the act with Barb earlier this afternoon. Folks in Colorado Springs were having a problem with a particular district that just wasn't doing anything, and it was gumming up the works. Perhaps similar to what may be happening here. And they asked the legislature, and the legislature complied by passing an amendment to the laws that basically said the city or the county can initiate a dissolution of the metro district by following this process. And dissolution of metro districts really, as much as anything else, focuses on making sure any debts that the district has incurred are repaid. Well, in this case, the district isn't doing anything that has generated that kind of financial obligation, and it would be appropriate to address dissolving this district under that statute. So that's another avenue that you all could take, or at least look at and evaluate.
Okay,
John?
thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this again.
Yep.
And it actually is so beneficial to hear it a second time. And I think the reason that I've been wondering if you can reimburse for the developer land is that the Sienna Lake Metro District over in Gypsum that this developer's been involved with. When I attended their Metro District meeting in 2024, the conversation, it was in June of 2024, there was conversation that they needed to repay back $7 million worth of bonds that were issued because they were in a restricted fund in order to buy the lake, Sienna Lake, because they were going to have the lake as a part of their metro district. And so they had set aside and raised $7 million and set it in a restricted account to buy this land from the Eagle County. And then Eagle County said they weren't going to sell them the lake. And so now they're having to repay back the bonds. And so to me, that sounds like you are able to use bond proceeds to purchase the land on which you are placing a public amenity.
Public
Well,
improvement.
Yeah, again, I'd have to look at the statute, but that would surprise me, and keep in mind that a lot of things that happen regarding metro districts that are just done and become legal because nobody challenged it. Not a lot, but many of the abuses that are taking place, like this Tabor election, I think that that's a violation of Tabor. I mean, it's certainly inconsistent with the purpose of Tabor, and but it's done in every metro district. It's common, and what I've learned quickly was, Metro District Law 101 is if you do it and nobody objects, it becomes legal. At least until somebody objects. So at any rate, so I'd really have to look at that a little closer, because I honestly, I've never seen it done. Again, that doesn't mean it couldn't be done, but in reading the statute, it just talks about services and improvements, and purchasing the land would be, wouldn't qualify. I don't think, but again, that's just me talking off the top of my head right now. That's something I would have to look at a little closer, because I haven't researched.
I'll do an open records request to find out exactly what happened with this Sienna Lake and the purchase of, and not getting the land purchased and having to repay back the bonds. And then I had one other quick question, and then I'll turn it over to everybody else. There's been a lot or there was an email sent out from the Dillon Coalition Group that claimed that 50% of all of the developers' bond proceeds that they issued in the Metro District would go to the Town of Dillon for the Town of Dillon to do whatever they choose with those proceeds. So, for example, if the developer issued $100 million in bonds that the Metro District would then give to the town of Dillon, $50 million of those bond proceeds for the town of Dillon to do whatever they would like with those bond proceeds. And additionally, that the town would never be responsible for paying back the $50 million or 50% of bond proceeds that it received. Can you please address that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said last week, I mean that's absurd. I mean that's just first of all, the developer. That's not the developer's money. He has a fiduciary responsibility toward the residents or future residents of the district, and that act would be a gross violation of the fiduciary duty. So I can't imagine their attorneys would counsel them or support that suggestion. I think the SEC would get involved if something like that were to happen, and there would be some legal consequences. It speaks, and I don't know the gentleman, and I've never met him, but that kind of attitude speaks highly to the hubris or arrogance that I have seen among other developers, that they think this is their money, that they think this is their government, and that they can basically do whatever they want to. And it's not how local government works.
Hey, Laura, just to chime in, I think what he was talking about, and I think it was getting a little blurred, he's talking about getting 50% of all his tax money back, and he was framing it to say, we're sharing 50% of that back to the town of the 50% of, because he's getting repaid 50% of all their taxes that they pay to the town. So the town's actually giving it back to them, but he was making it sound like he's sharing 50% of the taxes he's paying back to the town.
Then why would he say that he hoped that he issued
I don't know, but I think there was
billions?
That's what I think was getting mixed together.
Well, and I guess to be clear about it, he's going to provide a number to the developer is going to provide a number to District 1. District 1 is going to provide a number to the other districts as to how much they owe him. And I suppose if he tells them that they owe him $100 million and he wants to give away $50 million, okay, I guess he could do that. But, the problem, of course, is the checks and balances. Is he entitled to? Is he owed $100 million? And there's no way to gauge that unless you have oversight. And if the residents aren't there, or they don't have a vote, if they are there, the only one who could provide that oversight is the town. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
John, a question that I had regarded the document that I hadn't seen before, which you used, which is the infrastructure agreement with the District 1 and the developer. It certainly is not a filing, at least that I see. It's filed with the local government group in Denver. So I wondered where that came from and where that resides.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, those agreements, which are critical, they really are critical documents, aren't filed with DOLA on a regular basis, the state depository. Typically, in most of the districts I've worked with over the last 8 years, residents have to core those documents because they aren't voluntarily disclosed. These just so happen to be part of the 200 and some odd pages of attachments to the service plan. That's unusual. Don't find that often, but that's where I found them.
So that was part of this service plan review that was filed late in the year.
Well, the service plan is a document that has a lot of attachments to it. And the service plans that are typically put on Metro District websites don't include all the attachments. In your case, on your website, the service plan does include the attachments. Again, just going off the top of my head, I think it was like over 200 pages of attachments, and those attachments were included. Other attachments, probably the most important one, is the financial plan that they submit with the service plan. And coincidentally, all of those attachments would have been part of the application, appear to be a part of the application to the city, so the city would have them as well. And I can send you copies if you'd like.
I'd like to just clarify one thing real quickly.
Yeah.
There is an option for dissolution of the Metro District if we apply for that and we have enough support from the town council. Is that correct? And if we don't have any debt, we'd have to repay any debt that is outstanding with any of the Metro districts. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can share the statute. It's fairly new. I think it's either passed last year or the year before. The initiator wouldn't be citizens. It's not like a citizen initiative. It would have to be the city or the county that created the district, and so they would be the ones that would initiate the process. And I'd have to look at it again, but I think the process is initiated by letter or communication to the district. There's a court action involved, but to answer your question briefly, wouldn't be the citizens, other than the citizens, lobbying the city to do it. It would be the city that takes the formal initiative to dissolve the district. And then, yes, a big part of that process in any dissolution of a district is just making sure that if there are any debts outstanding, that those debts are taken care of one way or the other. And in this case, it's so early in the process that I can't imagine that would be an issue.
Is that 22-1097?
No, it'll be under Title 32, I think. Hold on a minute. I'm going to drop the screen real quick and go someplace else. Okay. The House bill was 22-1097, and it's
Okay, that's what I had.
That's what you have. Okay, good. Yeah, yep. So that's the bill number. The statute, that bill is amending Title 32, and it's referencing Title 32, Section 1-701 and 704. So yeah, you're on the same track.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I had a question back. First of all, I just wanted to say, I put up in the chat what was actually written by the Dillon Coalition about the thought that the town would be getting 50% of the bond proceeds. And I didn't see where he just thought that increased sales tax was going to be paying the town, but that they appeared to actually think that if $3 billion was issued, that the town would be getting $1.5 billion up front with no risk. But that being said, which maybe we could address again, given how it's written, I was also wondering, when you said that no vote or public hearing is required for the district to change their debt greater than 120 million, since they have $3 billion authorized, Are you meaning that that's no vote or public hearing and just a resolution by the Metro District? Or does the town also need just a resolution and no vote or public hearing or ordinance? And that this is a shortcut under the statute, so this is just something that could be privately decided between the town and the Metro District?
Yeah, so written into the service plan was what I call a shortcut to the statute, and isn't supported by the statute. And it's a nuanced shortcut, but basically what the service plan said was the city can approve debt in excess of 120 million up to 3 billion if there's a resolution. And of course, I'm not a student of your processes, but what that suggested to me was that they would not have to file a formal application to modify the service plan, which would include a public hearing and a public vote. So increasing the debt from 120 million to, pick a number, 200 million is a material modification that should require a formal application with a public hearing, public comment, public debate, and then a public vote by the city. What I read in the service plan is they could shortcut that and just have a resolution adopted by the city without going through the public hearing process. And that's false. I mean, you can't do that. But again, it's just like saying, well, residents will eventually get control of the districts as the development moves along. They're saying this stuff, and it's simply false. And they're saying it, but they're saying it to generate an attitude, and my word, grooming the city to just go along with whatever they're proposing. Because, well, we said it in the service plan. Well, it's inconsistent with the statute. And it doesn't matter what you said in the service plan if it's inconsistent with the statute, because you weren't authorized to say it.
Also, several people got muted and are wondering if they can get unmuted again.
Oh,
Thank you.
sorry.
John, Scott Downen.
Yes.
Hey, a question for you regarding the opportunity to modify a service plan.
Yep.
If the developer is interested in acquiring a piece of real estate from the town through the Dillon Urban Renewal Authority in some sort of partnership opportunity, would that give, let's say, the town an opportunity to renegotiate a service plan, including them by any chance?
It sounds like it. Again, I can't be definitive on it. It's something that your legal minds are going to have to take a closer look at. But it sounds like it. It sounds like that's a material change, a material modification in the original plan that was
Right.
that was presented in the service plan. And that's real dangerous. I mean, if on the one hand they want to form a government with very express powers and limitations, and at the same time they just want to kind of bob and weave and float and just kind of willy-nilly change things, that's inherently inconsistent with creating a new government based upon a very well-defined charter. Once you really shouldn't be creating a metro district until you are clear about precisely what you're doing, precisely what the territory is, precisely what the limitations and authorities are with government. And once you start, bobbing and weaving, changing and modifying, then the service plan has been breached, if you will, and these material modifications need to be addressed.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Could Jason Aubrey, as a board member, be considered an external financial advisor?
Well, I mean, they basically pick and choose who they want to be that advisor. Again, there's no check and balance, right? It's the developer basically picking somebody to do that. I suppose they could. There would be a clear conflict of interest, but that isn't a problem as long as the developer's in control of metro districts. And just to put a point on that, one of the called low-hanging fruit legislative efforts we made was to include metro districts under the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission. Right now, metro districts are the only form of government in Colorado that aren't subject to the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission. And it's a no-brainer. Don't we want these folks to follow the same rules and be eligible for prosecution as any other public official? And the legislator who promoted that story did a wonderful job, but she didn't get any votes. And in that particular hearing of the committee, when it first came up, there were, I think it was 3 members.
I won't drink it.
Who were told to go on vacation hours before the hearing. So all the people we talked to and educated weren't there, and they were replaced by ringers for the industry, and it was just totally shot down. So the ethics rules should apply. The ethics rules are there, but there's no way to enforce them in metro districts. Other than the checks and balances imposed by the towns and the voters.
John, have you seen any town or entity in the position that we're in right now get out of this quagmire? Do you see hope for us?
Well, I do. I mean, it's number one, you've got an active and increasingly educated citizenry who are concerned. It sounds like you have elected officials who are concerned. I know there was conversation about recall. I haven't been part of that or update on that. And you have a developer who wants to make money. So if you always assume developers are going to act like rational folks. They've proven me wrong a couple times, but at any rate, if the bottom line is to make money and work with the community to get from point A to point B in the most cost-effective way without paying a lot of attorneys, I would think they'd be interested in sitting down and talking to you. But to answer your question directly, I haven't had a situation exactly like this. This is a little different, but I'll make one other remark as long as we're on it. I mean, it's if the objective of the town is to build a parking garage, for example, or a recreational facility, or whatever it is, there's you can easily go to the citizens to pass a bond, to issue bond debt, and cut out the middleman. I mean, what's the point of having a partner if the only point to having a partner is they make a lot of money? If the point is providing services to the community at the most cost-effective way, issue your own bond debt, and whatever money is generated by the parking garage or whatever, revenue stream is anticipated with these improvements, that goes to the city instead of to a developer, and sharing that with the developer. But again, I'm not in the weeds, and I apologize for commenting on things that I, in this case, really don't know as much about as you do.
Well, perhaps our situation is as unique as the 100 mill levy situation. You've never seen a mill set that high.
I've never seen one that high as an initial matter. I mean, I've seen them creep up. The highest is one, I think, over in Candleless, over where the Rocky Flats is. I think they're up over 100, but that was kind of creeping. And there was a revenue sharing plan there as well, which, it's insane how much money the developer's making off the public there. It's just crazy. But at any rate, that's the only one I've seen as high, but it creeped up after a while. I've never seen one out of the box like this.
How typical is it to see in a bond prospectus, like the example that you gave, where the total bond issuance would be 600 million with a repayment cost of 4.9 or almost $5 billion, which is, I think that is that 8.2, the cost of repayment is 8.2 times the bond issuance?
Well, there are two numbers there. One is the principal. In your case, for example, the principal was 120 million. The repayment value was it 4 or 5? I'd have to look at the numbers again. But what they do is they add all those up. One of the leading attorneys explained it to the legislature. They just put it all into the same bucket, whether it's for mosquito control or roads or traffic lights, whatever. They just put it all in a bucket, and it then just becomes one bucket of, in this case, in your case, 3.4 or $3 billion, and they pull out of that bucket as much as they need for whatever they need. But with respect to the bond prospectus, how often have I seen those numbers explained in that same way, saying the voters authorized debt of $4.9 billion. Just about everyone. This is a selling point from the developer to the bond investors, saying there's a shitload of money here, there's a whole lot of money here, and these voters just can't wait to spend it. Again, without disclosing. And I raised this with Kristen Bear, and she got very incensed about it, but I think it's a material omission, something else that SEC would be curious about in a bond, by saying these voters were either employees, family members, or associated with the developer and have absolute conflict of interest.
Thank you.
Bill?
Yes, sir.
One more question. Based upon the acquisition of public lands, and there's been significant definitive changes in the Metro District and the developer through this entire process on multiple different properties. The next step to get a service plan modified or renegotiated would be a dissolution of the existing Metro plan. Did I kind of get that right? And then would you go to the town staff or the town council to bring this up?
Yeah, two potential opportunities that I see. Again, you've got to get the legal folks to get into the weeds on it. But one would be the new law that was passed that opens the door, gives the city or the county an opportunity to initiate the dissolution process. That would be the city, passing a resolution or whatever, issuing a letter or some document under the statute to the developer or to the district saying, we're proposing to dissolve you pursuant to this statute. So that's one potential avenue. The second is through these all these changes that are taking place or have taken place that in fact modify the service plan, and using that as a second door and saying, hey, you have, whether you applied for or not, you have in essence changed this whole thing such that the service plan is being amended without being amended. So we're going to call you in on the carpet and we're going to have a conversation about this. And we're either going to amend on our own motion consistent with what is going on or what needs to happen. Once you start having that conversation, I think that there's a potential opportunity to rewrite the service plan altogether.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Yeah, of course.
How much power does the town have in this process?
At the very beginning, before you approve a service plan.
Now, with the dissolution or amendment.
Oh, rats! That was the easy part of the answer. Yeah. After the service plan has been approved, if there aren't any provisions in the service plan that give you the tighter reins, under the statute, there's a 5-year review that you have to invoke, but there's a 5-year review process, and you can you can withdraw their ability or restrict their ability to issue any bond debt if you're not satisfied with that review. But that's 5 years. There's an annual report event, but that annual report is more of a reporting function as opposed to review function. The real opportunity, as I say, comes to policing modifications to the service plan. If the service plan is de facto being modified, you have an opportunity to basically call them on the carpet and have them show cause as to why it should not be modified, consistent to what you want to do based upon actions that they've taken or actions they haven't taken. And then again, the statute that gives you an opportunity to initiate dissolution and get rid of it altogether. So the powers are there, but it's not. It's going to take a little bit of energy to make them happen.
It might behoove us to be also trying to amend the finance agreement we made with them. And how familiar are you with finance agreements that are entered into with metro districts?
I've dealt with those. They're all, they're different ones, and I don't know that I've gotten into the weeds with respect to your financial agreements, and these are outside these would be IGAs between the city and the metro district. Is that what we're talking about?
I think you'd call it an IGA, yeah.
Yeah, intergovernmental agreement.
Right.
So yeah, I haven't looked at those, and those become basically contractual. So you can pretty much write into a contract anything you want to. um, governments like a city and a metro district are authorized to enter into contracts under the statutes. There's some criteria that apply, but basically they can agree to do pretty much anything they're authorized to do as a city or a county.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Hey, Barb.
She's muted.
Oh, I'm asking everybody to unmute again. I don't know.
There we go.
Sorry about
I'm
that.
back. So I just wanted to see how everyone's doing. We're kind of running, they're great questions, and I just wanted to make sure, see if anybody else had any other ones, if we're doing okay, and if we're ready to wrap up. So I was just going to ask the group.
They're a little smarter in finance than you. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Oh.
We certainly want to say thank you to John, Barb,
Yeah.
and for the time he's taken with us. And thank you, Barb, for getting this recorded.
Yeah.
I'm happy.
Thank you both.
Yeah, happy to help.
Barb.
And if, as I've said to Barb, if folks have any other questions, this is probably less than 1% of all the stuff that I've gathered and may be of interest to other folks. So I'm happy to share additional information. I did have an opportunity to listen to the taped hearing, and was very interested in many of the questions that the mayor asked, and would be happy to provide another perspective on those questions if there was interest, and then also share information that I just skipped over regarding our legislative experience, because there's one taped exchange. It's about 3 minutes long between one of White Bear's attorneys, who's your attorney or the attorney for the district here, and the legislature about how these agreements work, and then followed up with comments by one of the bond investment consultants, again, explaining how these agreements work. And they're basically saying it's a race to get the residents locked into as much debt as they can before the residents take over the boards, because they're afraid the residents might not pay or authorize debt to pay once they start exercising that power of checks and balances. And I'll just say from our experience, we were asking the developer, what did you spend that money on that we're in debt for? At that point, it was $29 million, and they're about to issue another $60 million of debt. And I said, so what did you spend the first $29 million on? If we owe you money, we'll pay you. But from our calculations, we already paid you for the pipes in the ground. And the White Bear attorney, who was counsel for our developer as well, looked at me, and this was in a meeting of 7 people, including our city council member and the mayor. And she said, and I'm quoting you, we're still trying to figure that out. And this was almost 11 years after they'd spent the money. So there's no checks and balances, and that's the problem. And they're writing agreements with themselves to obligate people who aren't there, don't have a voice, into spending whatever the developer says they should spend, and who knows what it's being spent on. So, at any rate, always nice to talk with folks who care about holding government accountable, and happy to help in any way I can.
Thank
Thanks, Tom.
you.
Take care.
You.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.